Hey guys, it's Jack here, and tonight we're doing a video on the Quincy King, the Emperor, the Almighty God, the Warlord, that's right, Yhwach. Now, Yhwach is a very interesting character. This video is essentially going to be a psychology on his contradiction, if that makes sense. Because he's unlike anyone else in the series, both in like appearance and in personality. Kubo really did a good job differentiating him with someone like Aizen. Because the two men are completely opposite characters. And yes, you guys might be thinking, Jack, I reckon they share some similarities. They do, but overall, their differences are quite vast. For instance, Yhwach starts off as an enigmatic, charismatic warlord of a figure that leads his men into battle to accomplish a goal. And his character development eventually takes us down a path where he becomes a reserved almighty god, essentially. And we're going to get into this video is essentially going to be about that progression to the state that he's in at the end of the series. Lots of people might call it bad writing, lazy writing on Kubo's part, or at least with the time restraints that Kubo had, he wasn't able to make Yhwach the type of character that a lot of fans may have wanted. However, I'm gonna splash some water on your face here, and I actually don't mind what happened to Yhwach here. I will admit, if you guys think that it was just time restraints and Kubo had to rush, so that's why Yhwach was like how he was at the end of the series compared to when he was first introduced because of those time restraints, I can totally accept that. You very well probably are right. But it's very fitting for a man like this to end up in the position that he ended up in. Now, the flip side of that with Aizen is that he doesn't get that stagnation, if you will. He comes onto the screen, we find out he's a villain, and from that moment, he just progresses. He doesn't have that realism, I guess you could say, that a character like Yhwach does have. Now, that's not an insult to Aizen, because if I'm being real with you guys, I like Aizen more than I like Yhwach, and Aizen would probably be is my favorite character in Bleach. Aizen is also the money-making character. Yhwach runs the risk, and it's a risk that ended up happening, I reckon, runs the risk of alienating a lot of the fan base on his character. Lots of people did lose interest in him. But we've been speaking enough of, where he ended up. Let's discuss how he got to where he is. So, what do we know about Yhwach? Surprisingly, the anime's been including some things that wasn't mentioned in the manga, which we always love to see, because we know the anime is considered canon, at least when it comes to the 1,000-year Blood War arc in the anime. We know that is considered canon by Kubo, because he's doing a lot of things in there that he wasn't able to do in the manga because of time restraints. So who knows, in the future we may need to do an updated video on this character of Yhwach, because they may have done some things in the anime that we didn't actually see reflected in the manga. But I do need the preference. This is going to be stuff that's happened in the anime, the new added details, but it's also going to be a lot of manga content. So guys, if you're the type of people that don't want to be spoiled whatsoever, then turn off now, because we are going to get into manga-only content that we haven't seen yet in the anime. So I can't really give you a timestamp of spoilers are over, jump over to there, because the whole video is essentially going to be them. So if you made it this far and you want to click off because of spoilers, that's totally fine. Come catch me in my next Bleach content. Most of them aren't really spoiler heavy. A lot of it is just past character analysis videos on characters that have already had their spot in the sun, essentially. But Yhwach, we know that when he was born, he was the son of the Soul King. How does that happen? I don't really know. Because I think off the top of my head, it was about 1,200 years ago that Yhwach was born. The times and the ages for the Quincy and the Sternritter are very obsolete in a lot of ways, because a lot of it kind of doesn't make sense, but that's a future discussion. With Yhwach though, 1200 years ago he was born, and we know he was the son of the Soul King. So how did that work? Because the Soul King would have been, he would have had his limbs cut off. He would have been imprisoned, essentially, kept up in the royal palace at that time. I don't know how he goes down to the human world and creates a child. Who knows? Maybe it was someone, a human, not a human, but just anyone who possessed a part of the Soul King, like your Pernidas, like your Gerards, like your Ukitakes, all of them, like your Rangikus, that had, that had sex with a girl, and then that's where Yhwach's like lineage to the Soul King comes from. I don't particularly like that because that would imply that if any of those people wielding a piece of the Soul King has a child, it's going to be, a similar level of power of Yhwach. I don't know. Maybe the Soul King was able to. We know that with his Almighty, he would be able to see into the future. Maybe he set up some countermeasures about his spirit or whatever conceiving a child. Maybe it was similar to. Sorry, also guys, about that blur there. Maybe it was similar to Anakin from Star Wars. Maybe he was able to use his powers to kind of create life in this woman. And that would be fitting Yhwach's Messiah, Jesus, divine God aesthetic that Kubo was going for with this. So I like to think that that's probably what has happened, but let me know down in the comments if you guys disagree. His birth, though, it was a miracle, but it wasn't some massive blessing for Yhwach himself. He wasn't born with all these godly powers or anything like that. Quite the opposite. He was actually born weaker than pretty much any human would be born. He was born without the ability to see, without the ability to hear, without the ability to taste. He couldn't do anything. He was essentially a lifeless husk that only had thought. And the people around him, for whatever reason, and this is more credence, I reckon, to the fact that his mother may have been like a virgin, and it may have been, the midichlorians, if you want to use the Star Wars reference, but the Ryatsu of the Soul King that has impregnated her. So a lot of people are seeing this Mary-like figure of, the Holy Virgin, essentially. So that may have been the reason why everyone was so drawn to Yhwach. Because why else was everyone so enamored by a baby that very well most people back 1200 years ago would have thought would have died? So I reckon that's more evidence to the fact that may have been how Yhwach was conceived. But they consider Yhwach a miracle baby, and they touch Yhwach like when he's an infant and stuff like that, and basically by touching Yhwach, it wouldn't have been deliberate at first because they wouldn't have known this was going to happen, but they started noticing that benefits would start coming up into their lives. It's a bit ambiguous what was happening, whether or not it was kind of a luck thing, like where your fortune started to rise, or whether or not it was more like, you've got cancer or something like that, and you've just been healed from your cancer. Oh, sorry, guys. Like a blind man comes and touches baby Yhwach, and his eyesight is recovered. It's a bit of up in the air. It could very well be both, or it could just be one of them. It would make more sense for it to be physical acts like that of healing people rather than acts of affecting probability and stuff like that, because that does really, really get into godhood territories, and he's not at that stage yet as an infant. Or it could be something like where they'll touch Yhwach and they'll gain a power, like a pseudo shrift type of thing. They were becoming greater warriors and everything. And that very well, now that I think about it more, that very well might be the best answer, the one that we all, Jesus Jack, I just mucked up before, that I could maybe run with there, because we know that when the people touch Yhwach and gain these blessings, it's essentially dooming them, because they always die, and that that piece of his soul that Yhwach gave off to these people comes back to Yhwach. So the fact that they were all just dying, it could just be the fact that, that's what happens when you take a part of Yhwach's soul. Or it could have been they were kind of getting a bit too big for their britches and they were going out and fighting enemies and they were underestimating people and they were dying. And the reason why they're more likely to die after touching Yhwach is because they've got this power, they're more arrogant with it. Essentially, another movie reference for you all. Harry Potter and the Elder Wand, where people would wield it and they would get drunk off the power and then they would get defeated. So it might have been something like that as well. But Yhwach, as he's doing this, as he's not even doing it intentionally to begin with. As parts of his soul keep being separated from him and going with all these people, once it comes back to him, he starts to learn everything that's part of his soul experienced. So things like power, things like thoughts, things like techniques and skills and life experience. It all comes back to him. And his husk of a body starts regaining life. He starts being able to see, he starts being able to hear, he starts being able to taste, he starts being able to move around and everything like that. Which is nice mirroring to the future poem that's written about Yhwach, about how in 900 years he will retain his pulse, 90 years he will regain his thought, 9 years he will regain his strength, and in 9 days he will take the world. The fact that as a baby he's going through something similar, I reckon, is quite interesting. But we also start to see that this is where, like, from the moment Yhwach's born, he's kind of destined to go down the path that he gets led down. Because when you think about it, he's not really living. He's taking the experiences of everyone else around him, and he's doing it as an infant. So naturally we would progress, infant, baby, toddler, child, teenager, etc., 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 until you would eventually become an older person and die, assuming that a casualty doesn't happen before that. But if you're going through the natural progression of everything, you'd eventually get old, you'll have all your life experiences, and then you'll die. But Yhwach is getting them all instantly as an infant. So there's no way that he would have been able to kind of comprehend and be able to deal with everything that he's starting to take in so suddenly. Even if we do imagine that he was, greater physiology than a regular human and stuff like that, higher brain development and everything like that. Regardless of who you are, that type of stuff would warp you. Because he's not living these experiences himself. He's taking them from other people. And these him passing out his soul to everyone around him, and the people around him being so enamored and so willing to, because they would start seeing that people were dying, but they don't care because they know that touching Yhwach will bring them the miracles that they want in their life. It is what Yhwach is here. And what Kubo is telling us, the audience here, at least in my opinion, is that it's not a messiah figure that Yhwach is that Kubo is trying to create in Yhwach. It's actually the opposite. It's a satanic figure. He's essentially Lucifer in this scene because everyone here is making deals with the devil, essentially. What do I mean by that? I mean, in terms of making an exchange by gaining what you want, you're doing that at the cost of your soul and the cost of your life. And I love that Kubo was able to do this, to be able to paint such a devilish ability behind the guise of an innocent infant. It's really, really great writing, in my opinion. But we don't know where Yhwach kind of goes from this stage of being an infant to where he ends up as a warlord. Because it's somewhere along the line, and I reckon this might be touched on in the anime, somewhere along the line, he starts the Quincy race. He's the forefather of them all. Every Quincy shares his blood. He starts this race and he decides that he's going to go to war with the Soul Society. Because at this time, he's already conquered a lot of, it's described as the northern part of the world. So essentially Europe, and because of all the German influences here, they're kind of going on a similar path as the Nazis. Now, Yhwach here, we get he doesn't say it here, but this is where we first see what his ideology is. Because he has a very interesting take, a very interesting goal on what he wants done. He wants to create a world where there is no death. Death? Death. He wants to combine the human world, Waco Mundo, and the Soul Society into one form, and when these worlds clash, it will apparently create a land or a world where the concept of life and death doesn't exist, and we all just exist in this state of eternal life, essentially. It's a little bit ambiguous, everything that Yhwach wanted to accomplish, but in his words, he wants to basically defeat death. He wants to conquer death, he wants to take that out of the equation, and the way he seems to be doing it is a very... He likes to talk about it as quite like an action of like a humanitarian, in the sense that he's doing this for our betterment. He is taking away death so we can all live happy lives, essentially, like that. That's his role, that's his purpose, as the son of the Soul King and a man that wields this type of power. But what does that goal really entail? Because if no one could die, then conversely no one could live as well. Because we're only living because of the concept of death. And it's this contradiction here that is the essence of Yhwach's character. Like, I'm thinking about even titling this video, like, the psychology of contradiction. Something along those lines, potentially. Because we see him being this warmonger who preaches about peace. He will talk about not wanting to like raise his fists, essentially, not wanting to get his hands dirty, but then we see him instantly kill and dismember people. He seems very bipolar in a lot of ways. He doesn't really seem to know what end of the spectrum he really wants to be on. It tends to be on what side of the bed he wakes up on. And this contradiction we see more in where he starts, like we were saying, and where he ends. Because he does, and like this is where the contradiction comes in. He's not, as a warlord, as the ruler of the Quincy's, he's not just some heartless monster that doesn't care about any of them. Because in a lot of scenes we see him showing care for the Quincy. He calls them his children. He doesn't want them to die. We know he does not look well on hollows. He considers them trash, essentially. But with his children, he seems to hold them in some sort of, not reverence, but in some sort of higher standing than everyone else. He was visibly, and this was as Royd Lloyd's, but it was Royd Lloyd with Yhwach's memories. He was visibly shocked when he saw his dead comrades that Yamamoto revived, showing a level of kind of disgust and a level of not wanting to have to destroy men that he called his sons, his comrades, his family, essentially. But then on the flip side, he's happy to kill them all. It's very, very all over the place. Because we see that he uses his Ashvalan on Ichigo's mum and Uryu's mum and everyone to regain his power 9 years ago. So, but even then, that in his mind, you can write that off as, this is for the greater good. My goal here is to lead my children to a paradise. To do that, I'm going to need my power back, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to take the lives of the Quincy that aren't currently loyal to me. An awful moral act that he has done, but at least something that us as the audience can kind of understand where he's coming from, not sympathize with it, but at least be like, alright, that makes sense for his character. But then it goes on, and he uses the Ashvalan to take the lives of all the lower-ranking Sternritter. The people that we have just been watching for the last 100 chapters go to war for Yhwach. He happily sacrifices them all to revive his Shushfotl, the goddamn Gerard, Lil Barrow, Askin, Pernida, those people. If it hasn't already been obvious, my pronunciation of German, my pronunciation in English as well, but just in general, pronunciation is goddamn awful, so I'm going to make more mistakes on that. But the elite guard, he sacrifices all the lower rank Quincy's to revive them, showing just an insane level of pragmatism and a very cruel level of pragmatism. He doesn't even doubt it or question himself. He's like, oh, this needs to be done. They need to be stronger. Boom. You're all dead, but my elite warriors are left standing and they're going to continue on my battle. And they're doing that because, he's right with his pragmatism in the sense that there was not much those characters could really do anymore. And to complete Yhwach's goals, it's better to empower the already strong level Quincy's, and that's what he does. But with how cruelly he's able to do it, it just goes to show that care can be flipped on its head at a moment's notice. Because I wouldn't go as far to say that this is Aizen showing some level of goodwill to the Arrancar, because that all was an act. Aizen was able to sweet talk everyone around him. We see this by everything he did in the Soul Society when he was essentially undercover as just the nice, gentlemanly Squad 5 captain. Yhwach isn't like that, and he doesn't really need a reason to be like that. I do like to think that he does care about the Quincy. It's just this insane level of cold, cynical pragmatism that allows him to flip that switch and to make those sacrifices. Because he even goes a step further. These elite guards that he apparently cares about so much that he just sacrificed essentially his entire force to revive, he sacrifices them as well to then empower himself. So not just Gerard, his literal father's heart, but also Hashwolf, who he considered his firstborn son and the man most closest to him. He's happy to just wipe him out of existence, essentially, without any sort of remorse, without any sort of words of condolences or anything like that. And it's that level of duality to his character that I think loses a lot of people. Where I think it actually works, though, is when you look at it on the progression of where he's going in the story. Because, like we said, we saw him as an infant taking on all this power that he was not ready to handle. And he grows up, he grows stronger, and what does he do? He keeps absorbing more power. And as he's absorbing more power, he's becoming less and less human, for want of a better word, but less and less himself. And the sad thing is, he never had a chance to be himself. That was always taken from him by his soul being passed out and absorbing those personality traits of those people around him. That's why Yhwach was always doomed to fail, because it wasn't Yhwach. He was an amalgamation, I know I butchered it, I'm continue going, of just everything around him. He was essentially his surroundings. So, and like we were saying, with the progression of it all, he absorbs the power, he absorbs Misaki and everything like that, he absorbs the Stern Ritter, he gets stronger, he defeats Ichibei, like his long-term rival, as we've seen in the anime, he then absorbs the Schutzviertel, and he then absorbs the Soul King. Let's rewind it. He may have actually absorbed the Soul King first, before Hashwolf and everything like that. In fact, he did. But by the time he had absorbed the Soul King and by the time he absorbed Hashwolf, he was no longer the Quincy King. That wasn't him anymore. He had become a godlike primordial figure that was apathetic to everything and that was just in another tier of dimension. Kind of like what Aizen says about three-dimensional objects never being able to interfere with two-dimensional objects. That's kind of what has happened here. Because he's grown... It's kind of ironic as well, and more good writing from Kuro here. Everything that he said he was disgusted with his father, he has essentially become. He's got more autonomy than his father did, but he's essentially just a slave to his own power here. Very similar to some of his Stern Ritter, actually, like Asnod. I did a character analysis video on him that I suggest you guys go and see, and I described him as a slave to his own power as well. Yhwach is essentially just a more powerful version of that. Because by absorbing all this power, by absorbing all these other traits, he loses what was making him such a strong, driving, charismatic force to his people. And that's what we see. We start to see the beliefs of his stern Ritter sway and change. They no longer consider him their king. They're considering him a villain that needs to be stopped. Someone that doesn't have his best interests at heart. Their best interests at heart, sorry. And it's really sad to look at. Because if he really considered these people his children, which I did, he's doing what, like, the worst thing that any parent could do. He's turning his back on his children, and he's going even further to take their lives. And seeing where Yhwach ends up through his actions of wanting to strive for a better place for his children, rightly or wrongly, I think is quite a tragic character progression of his character. I could have said that a little bit more elegantly there, but it gives... How should I word this? When I look at it that way, it gives me a much better understanding of who Yhwach is as a character compared to just, an overpowered god figure that just lost all his personality. Because if you remember, he was on the front lines fighting in the invasion of the Soul Society. But then once he absorbs everything, he basically just sits in his throne and doesn't do much for the rest of the series. Which I like, because like we've been saying for the last 5 minutes, it's showing just a different level of being he's become. How he's ever so closer to his father that he was so disgusted by. So, the fact that the further along he progressed, it was actually the further along he was reduced, I reckon is just a lovely, lovely writing by Kubo. I reckon if he had the time that he wanted to, he could have made Yhwach even better. But I do reckon with what he decided to go with that duality and contradiction of his character, the progression of going downhill so far until he became essentially, another Star Wars reference here, the very thing he wanted to destroy. It's great writing on Kubo's part. It's very, very ambitious writing, taking someone like a satanic messiah type of figure, because like we said, the duality there of Yhwach's character, and then giving him all these contradictions and all these compelling plot narratives devices that Kubo wanted Yhwach to go down. I just thought, and doing it in such a major arc where there's so many characters and so many different moving pieces going on, I thought it was very, very ambitious of Kubo, and something that more than not he succeeded in. I do reckon, like we've been saying, in the anime he's going to be even better. But for what we did get in the manga, I wasn't disappointed. At least after kind of doing this video and sitting down and thinking on it more. I will admit that while the manga was going on, I was kind of just comparing him to Aizen and being like, he's not really... He's what the series needed at the time, because we couldn't do another Aizen. But he wasn't living up to what Aizen was for me, even, like, close. Which made it a little bit disappointing for me. But I need to remember, and, just to give you guys a reminder of it, Aizen was my favorite character. So I was kind of putting Yhwach on a pedestal that he could have never really hoped to overcome. I would even go so far to say there's not many better characters in anime than Aizen. I'm such an Aizen fanboy. Probably even more of an Aizen fanboy than I am a Madara fanboy, if I'm being honest. So Aizen, definitely top 5 villains of all time. Maybe even top 10, top 15 characters of all time. I'd have to really sit down and give that a lot of thought. But what have you guys thought about tonight's video on Yhwach here? Am I just talking nonsense? Am I just talking bollocks? Or is there some truth in what I'm saying? Because these videos aren't scripted. I kind of just jump on, start rambling about Yhwach, and the thoughts come to me as I'm speaking about them. I do a little bit of prep in the sense of being, like, thinking to myself, like, what do I want to talk about? Oh, this. But when it really comes down to it, I hop on camera and I just, spew out everything that I'm thinking about Yhwach. And I've kind of liked where we've kind of landed on his character here. It's a little bit different than other character analysis videos I've done in the past. And I think I might do more videos like this, rather than just regurgitating everything that happened about them in the series. Picking key details I wanted to discuss about the character and then doing a whole video on it. Like with what we've done here about seeing the progression of Yhwach's character from where he began to where he ended. And all the different analogies and all the different reasons why he ended up like he did. I kind of like the idea of the character analysis video being more like that, rather than just, reading off his wiki page or any nonsense like that. I thought it's more a personal take, and I'm curious to see what you guys think about it in the comments. I'm curious to see how well this video does to begin with. How popular of a character is Yhwach? So let me know down in the comments all of that good stuff. What you thought of Yhwach, what you thought of tonight's video. If you've liked today's video, make sure to like and subscribe. But guys, I've been Jack Cypher. It's been a pleasure deciphering tonight's video. It's been a pleasure talking about the Quincy King himself, Yhwach. But have a lovely night, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.